Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday. That's all you need to know, really. Monday, November 14th, 2022. Time for another show. Time for kids to go to school. Time for all sorts of regular Monday activities. I don't know what they are. In your house. And maybe this is the last day that you can use Twitter and hashtag KITM in order to tell me. Although I think I'll be hanging around for the bitter end. While it's true that I guess I don't want to be contributing to Elon Musk's fortune, probably in all likelihood, you know, when you get to be a billionaire, there's very little that anybody can do to avoid contributing to your fortune. You own everything at that point, or shares in everything. So maybe there's nothing I can do. But I guess I got to look for an exit at some point. So maybe to that point, perhaps we can share a fun contribution, just a catch-up contribution. What's going on with Twitter and Mastodon and others. And those of you who are making your exits, you can send your personal testimonials about how easy or how hard it was and what you're finding and whether or not it's worth it or whether we should all just give up on social media forever anyway. I mean, that's probably not a bad idea. Just kind of interesting watching the collapse of things and also watching along on Apple TV Plus or whatever the hell it's called now. We still have that. That's another mistake. It's held over from something where we got it for free for a while, and you know the scam. You never remember to cancel it, but it's actually pretty good, and I'm enjoying the shows. So maybe we keep it. And I don't know. A lot of decisions to be made about which services we'll go ahead with and which services we won't. But we're watching the We Crashed, which is the story of the WeWork thing. I don't even know what to call it. I barely have any memory of the fact that it existed. I recall that there was such a thing. I wasn't particularly clear on it at the time. I think the only time it really entered my consciousness was that there was something going on where people were locked out of their offices or something, and maybe a hacker had done something. So I was never really entirely clear on what was going on in there or you know, how it was different from the other places where you could rent an office for an hour or a day or so. I didn't really get the concept. It wasn't, you know, in my head space at all. But anyway, pretty interesting to watch them do this thing. And once again, I am reminded that, you know, if everything in life is A, either going your way, or B, revolves around getting other people to enact your vision and you just sit on a pile of money, I guess I also would be an early riser or a go-getter or have that positive mental attitude that's so essential to entrepreneurial success. But since I don't have that going for me and I haven't figured out how to just have people heap money on top of money and keep it so that I have, I mean, according to the movie anyway, his like domestic servants who like bring him a bong while he's still in bed. So that, you know, it's not usually on my list, maybe not on yours either in terms of having people waiting on you hand and foot, but it seems like things were pretty tailored for that guy and his days. I mean, I imagine he figures that was going pretty good for him. I'm just sort of astonished about that. And I saw something late last night as Oliver Willis was, you know, going over something else entirely and just saying, hey, you know, hey kids, right? This may sound crazy, and it should sound crazy to you, but he was just reminding everybody back in 99, 2000, thereabouts, you could just add .com to the end of your corporate name and Wall Street would be like, you are now worth $1 bajillion. And here is that money. And there was that time. I worked for a company that, I guess in a more serious vein, decided to add the term interactive to the end of their name, and that was supposed to make them worth $1 billion. It didn't work for everybody. I can just tell you that much anyway. And I see this morning that there's a tweet going around. I retweeted it. Maybe if you're up and listening live, you may have just seen the thing if you're still on Twitter. And who's tweeted this out? Renee Graham, who says, has two covers of Forbes magazine from I don't know how far apart, but, with the Forbes 400, the featured item in that month's publication. And on the cover of one is, I forget the guy's name, but it's like Sam, is it Bankman-Fried or something like that? The guy behind the latest, I guess, cryptocurrency collapse, the FTX exchange, I think. And I thank you for, Scott sent along a timeline on what's happening with FTX, which, I don't know. I guess I hope to understand it one day, and maybe we'll discuss it one day, but I think it needs to clear up and be expressed in layman's terms, and maybe cheddar.com is layman enough to help us figure out what's going on here. The other one is, what's her name? Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, and somebody else in response to my, I don't know what you would call it, my moaning and groaning about how ridiculous the WeWork story was, saying that they watched a mini series of sorts about the Theranos story, which I missed entirely, the mini series anyway. So maybe I'll go back and watch that. But that too was something else. And they were just saying, there were scenes in the movie where people were milling about, frantically running about an office, looking like they were doing something, but for a company that wasn't producing any product of any kind, and everything was a fraud. It's interesting to find out, like inside the company, working for it, not at the top level, but at a mid-level, and running around all day in the office. What did you think you were doing? I mean, those people must have thought they were producing something or moving in some way, progressing towards a product of some kind, even though the official narrative on it is, no, there was no product. It was all just fake. But surely Elizabeth Holmes, well, she certainly doesn't say, yeah, I admitted it was fake. She keeps telling the story that it was totally real. And, one of the interesting angles even on the WeWork story, the story being told in the miniseries is of a guy who's just, scamming his way through millions and then eventually billions of dollars and getting more and more people to invest in him just on pure confidence. And then he burns it on crazy parties and office amenities and everything. And that's a very familiar story. I mean, we see that in a lot of these startup stories. But he, and probably every other startup in the world, and that's the problem, he's, one, he's so convincing, and two, you get the feeling that he believes right up until the end. And I guess he still does believe this because apparently somebody else is now giving him hundreds of millions of dollars to do some other thing. And maybe it's the same thing all over again. I don't know. Maybe it's even warranted. But surely, these guys always will tell you, I'm just one more investment away. I know you guys, gave me all your money and I burned it all. And I know I'm asking you to trust me when you shouldn't, and give me another couple million or another $1 billion. And there's nothing in the world fundamentally that says you ought to. But this time I'll totally break through. And, it was an interesting discussion last night where, how many times did Jeff Bezos have to do this where, people were there for a long time. Amazon was a big money loser. And he just kept saying, if you'll just give me, 10 more chances and $10 billion more dollars, I'll show you how you can turn this into the biggest company in the world. And then even for a while, it was the biggest company in the world, sort of, and it was still losing money. But everybody just agreed that it was worth trillions of dollars, and it just kept going. But, somehow he did manage to turn it into, well, I remember the old days when the radio commercials used to be, well, Amazon.com is the world's biggest bookstore. The big play in the ads was that they were constantly looking for space, like going to rent out the Super Bowl because they needed it because they were the biggest bookstore in the world. And now they're just the biggest everything store. And was the difference between the guy from WeWork, whose name was Adam Newman, and Jeff Bezos just convincing one or two more rounds of people to just give him billions of dollars? And eventually, I guess, if people just give you billions of dollars, something will be worth something at some point. I've never really figured that out because we just don't work in billions here. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's a world that we don't exist in. The world that we exist in, we care who is in office and we care how much gas costs, and sometimes we're supposed to care more about that than who's in office, but never works that way for us. Greg Dworkin is here because he's collected all the stories we actually care about. Let's get back on track. It's been some time since we talked to you. Greg, good morning.
Good morning. So, I think in some ways the better analogy would be if Jeff Bezos, when he was doing Amazon Books, said, no, invest in me because just give me enough time. But what he was really doing is taking all of the books from Barnes and Noble and selling them on Amazon. I mean, it's
Maybe.
one thing to
He's
go
might as
and
well
say,
have been.
okay, you just need time, you just need time. And it's another thing to actually start looting the accounts that you have, which you're not supposed to do, and then taking
Yes.
that money and putting it in your other company over here.
Right. Well, that's what. Yeah,
That's
and we
kind
have
of
an
a
Elon
problem.
Musk issue going on.
And that's not exactly, and that's not the same thing as, oh, just give me more time. I just have to convince investors to, to do that. What may have happened there, since there seems to be a lot of money missing, it remains to be seen.
Well, yes, and that happens a lot, and it is surprising every time venture capitalists and private equity people say, yeah, but he's really got a vision here, but they all seem in all the movies. One of the guys is always like, haven't we seen this movie before? Though,
Well,
100
speaking of
times.
haven't we seen this movie before, the good news is Michael Lewis is writing a book about it because apparently he was embedded with this guy for a couple of months before this happened.
Oh, okay. So we'll learn. Which
The guy
collapse
who
are we
read-
talking
who
about?
wrote The Big Short. So,
Okay.
we'll see what happens.
But which collapse is he writing about?
The
Was it WeWork or was it the other? Or is
No,
it
no, it's the
FTX
crypto
one.
stuff.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure which one we're on yet. I'm still catching up through video, through documentary movies about collapses from 10 years ago. But yeah, it does astonish me that people are still caught up in collapses now, and that there aren't people who. I feel like I lost $1 billion on this same kind of thing where a guy was just really excited, and I gave him all my money.
Well, and also Theranos. There's
Yes, right.
Forbes is like getting a reputation for having the worst crooks in America on their covers. It's just a
Sports
wonderful
Illustrated.
thing. If you really want to know where not to invest, just look at the cover of Forbes,
Yeah,
where
I
they
guess.
feature somebody, or maybe CNBC,
Get Out when
which
that
is
happens.
let's get the CEOs here to tout their companies rather than an actual news station.
Yeah, maybe that's the thing, or maybe it's like the Sports Illustrated curse. Forbes Illustrated, they can call it. And when you see your companies or something you've invested in show up on the cover, you say, "All right, it's time to start selling."
Anyway, I suppose I shouldn't say this.
Be a good
but,
time to sell, 'cause
really
others are
not my
buying.
area of expertise. So we'll see how that plays out.
Right,
I
neither
will
of us
tell
are
you this
securities
though. I can
dealers.
remember back in the day, when I was working for a living, and this would be in the .com era.
Okay, yes, right.
And
Greg.com.
my medical group was really doing quite well. And we
Uh-huh.
were growing, and we were really pleased with how things were going. And we had a young guy who was basically the chief financial officer.
Oh boy. Yeah.
No, it's I mean,
It
he didn't
worked
do anything
out
bad.
okay.
He
You're
didn't steal
here.
anything. But I
I'm
just
just
remember
worried.
him turning to us and say, "Listen, I'm resigning."
Oh.
And we said, "Why?" And he said, "Because look, I mean, I'm young,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not married. This .com thing, I got to get in on that and make some money because it's going to go bust in 2 years, and I just don't have a really big window."
All right.
And that's exactly what he did.
Well, that at least was correct, as opposed to this is the future. I'm going to be,
No, he knew it wasn't going to last, and he
Yeah,
knew it
good,
was a
all right.
scam. And he said, "I just don't have a big window to get in on that, and I got to do it."
All right.
I
I
do it
think
now.
that's,
When am I ever going to have an opportunity like this again?
I guess that's real. Like my worry was that this was going to be a story because these sorts of things, as ridiculous as it sounds, did happen. You're working, your medical group's growing nicely, and your young CFO says, "We're going to be medicalgroup.com now,
Yeah.
and we're going to buy a plane."
Yeah.
And then you all go bankrupt, and that
Yeah, and
sucks.
we're going to invent this thing called crypto that you never heard of.
Yeah. All right. Well, as long as that didn't happen to you, and the guy knew what he was getting into and knew how long he had. That all right. That sounds good. Maybe that was a good outcome. Hope he's doing all right now. I think, except hard to root for that too.
Yeah.
But,
Anyway, lots of other news is happening, and we should mention, for example, President Biden is meeting with President Xi and trying not to start a war.
give him some
And
cake.
as of when I last checked, there was still an active shooter, unfortunately, at UVA.
Yes, it is important to stay active, but if you're going to shoot, think about closing down quickly.
A preliminary discussion appears to be maybe it was not random but targeted, but who knows, and a lot more to come.
Yes.
But we'll watch that.
Yeah. Also, similar situation apparently now at University of Idaho. They have found 4 bodies. So everybody's puzzling over campus shooters all of a sudden.
Yeah. In any case, there's an election, and the election is still going on, and I think that really needs to be the focus
All
of what
right.
we're doing here. And there's a lot of lessons to learn, and most people will learn wrong ones because that's what we do as Americans.
Yes.
Well,
then you
but
can
we
go
still
to
don't know
university.
exactly how things shake
get
out.
shot.
I will say this. Here's the AP.
All right.
The Associated Press has not yet called the open governor's race in Arizona between Katie Hobbs, the Democratic Secretary of State, and nutcase right-wing nutjob Republican Carrie Lake. Oh, they didn't say that, but they should have.
Oh, well,
A
they'll
former
edit it
TV
in.
broadcaster and current wingnut, because there are still too many votes left to count to conclude that Hobbs' lead is insurmountable.
All right.
So that's what's going on.
That's the
However,
word.
if you check what is euphemistically called Predicted, a website of addicted gamblers, which really should be called Reacted, because what happens is the best way to read it is to see what the gamblers there took the news as, like the rest of us, and what they did with it.
Okay.
And it turns out that whereas Lake was the favorite before the election, as of now, the day before, it's going to be called tonight, most likely, in Hobbs' favor. But Hobbs is a huge favorite. And
Well,
that's
all right.
because what's happening is as the votes come in, as our friend Garrett Archer, the John Ralston of Arizona, refers to as Maricopa incoming. Every
Maricopa
evening
incoming, I
when
see.
the
All right.
tranche of votes comes, he has a little tweet that says Maricopa incoming, and that means within 4 or 5 minutes we're going to get the results from Maricopa. And there's so many votes
Partial,
that they
yeah.
come in 90,000 tranches at a time, size
Okay.
tranche at a time. And so, Maricopa in toto is going to vote for Hobbs, but there's different areas of this very large county, and the red areas are coming in now. And what happens is they're literally, you report them as they come in, which is to say, when you're in the center of Phoenix, which is blue, they get reported first.
I see.
And then as you go out toward the red suburbs, they take longer to physically walk over to the voting
Because of
area where they're
fraud.
counted.
Yeah.
And so the red areas get counted last.
That's
And so each
fraudulent.
different tranche that comes in on the 4 successive days it takes to get 270,000 votes counted is going to be redder and redder and redder. And that's why AP is saying what it says. So on the first day, and these are the votes that people drop off on election day, what is often called the late earlies. They're early votes, but they dropped off late.
They need a new name.
So the late earlies come in, and on the first day, Katie Hobbs actually wins that, which was a surprise, and that changed all the thinking and predicted and said, oh, maybe Lake's not going to win.
All right.
And then the second day, Lake's camp said there's going to be an enormous vote for us. 80 to 90% is going to be for us. And it comes in, and it's not that.
It's hard to
It's
ever
like
deliver
mid
on
50s
that.
or
80,
52 or
90%.
whatever. And then yesterday comes in and it's like 54 when they were expecting 70. And there's only one more to come. And she's got to win like all of them. And she's not going to. And that's why Hobbs is going to win. And there's still votes out in Pima, which isn't quite as big. There's 40,000 there. And there's still a tiny amount of votes out in the rurals, as John Ralston would refer to it, except this is Arizona,
United
not
States.
Nevada. But bottom line is there's probably not enough votes for Carrie Lake to catch Katie Hobbs.
All right, good.
And so the question's going to be, what are the headlines? I happen to prefer Carrie Lake loses, but I understand that Katie Hobbs is the winner. It really ought to be Katie Hobbs wins.
Well, sure.
So if you want to do
Give
it
her
as
some
Carrie
credit.
Lake loses to underdog Katie Hobbs, that's fine.
All right.
The important thing is this election-denying right-wing nutjob loses, and that will mean that all of the Secretary of State and governor election deniers lost. And that's huge.
Yes. That would be great. I can't
So
wait.
whatever happens with the House, which we're probably not going to take, but we'll keep the Republicans to a net seat gain of something like, I don't know, 7, something like that. It's going to be a pretty darn good election, and there will be different results in different areas so that Florida had a red wave for sure, and New York had something of a red storm,
Okay.
and everywhere else was, a little more nuanced, and then Michigan was really blue.
Right.
And so depending upon where you look, you're going to see different results. And that's why I say people are going to take the wrong lessons because they're going to look in the wrong places. Depends what you're talking about.
Oh, well.
So, who got the most votes? Probably the Republicans, if you add up the total votes. Does it matter?
I don't know.
Not really, because that's not how these things are determined. Well, why did they get the most votes? Because Florida's a big state, and New York is a big state, and the Democrats didn't do as well there. Well, California's a big state, but we don't even have those results yet. But in the end, the generic ballot was saying a Democrat probably +2, and it may be a Republican +3. And yet, a terrible election for Republicans. And who could have predicted that?
Yeah, not normally the case. Usually when we're often told that it has to be Democrats +7 for it to look like there were any Democratic votes at all.
Yeah. So the bottom line is it was a terrible election for Republicans any way you slice it.
All right.
With some bright spots for them like Florida. And it was a great election for Democrats with some dark spots like New York. But the governorship still went Democratic. What happened in New York, my theory of the case there is that it's all about Cuomo and the poisoning of the Democratic Party. Remember, New York is the place with breakaway Democrats. I mean, there's just so much crap going on in the party there. They really need a Ben Wickler to clean everything up.
That would be an idea.
I think that had a lot more to do with that than Lee Zeldin used crime and it worked. No, that's not really what was going on. Democrats in New York were really pissed off at their own party.
Yeah, well, they have had control of things for so long that they tend to do things like, well, we can risk screwing around internally in the party and throw fellow Democrats overboard if they piss us off in, small picayune ways inside the state capitol and still dominate the numbers. And eventually that A, becomes not true, and B, people are kind of tired of those sorts of games. And why can't you be more like your national brand and just be for these things and deliver consistently on these goals, and we'll support that.
Right. So people outside of New York want New York to be national, and people in New York want it to be hyper-local. Mm-hmm. And so that tension always exists, but, in New York it's especially so. So let's give you some big picture stuff, and then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty after the break. Right. And I want to talk to you a little bit about rules after the break, because there's some fascinating stuff going on.
I don't know any rules.
But Ron Brownstein, taking the big picture. In Democratic-leaning and swing states, voters last week delivered an unmistakable cry of resistance to the restrictive GOP social agenda symbolized by the drive to ban abortion. But in red states, where Republicans have actually imposed that agenda over the past 2 years, GOP governors, and I'm thinking Ohio, for example, and Florida, cruised to re-election without any discernible backlash. That sharp contrast underscored the depth of the divide between red and blue America and points to the further partitioning of the nation into divergent, hostile blocs living under fundamentally different rules for civil rights and liberties. And the results could simultaneously embolden red state Republicans to continue advancing the militantly conservative social agenda they've pursued since 2021 on abortion and other issues, while making clear that such an agenda is untenable outside of those core GOP states. So that's one of the things to watch for. But the subtlety there, the nuance, is that maybe not when it comes to referenda like in Kansas.
Yes.
So what will they do?
And
maybe they'll stop young people from voting and get rid of referenda. That's what they do. So,
likely option.
That's not snark. That's actually what they might
they've
try.
Already, decided to throw at least the results of referenda overboard in the state legislatures, so they may throw the whole process over. Mm-hmm. Pain in the neck. We don't have to decide this way.
Right. And what happens is, so everybody looks at the results and gets the wrong idea. So here's a really interesting 3 or 4 tweet thread here from Chaz Nuttycombe. That's his real name. And
yeah, I've seen that name lately.
But he's an election analysis guy, data guy. And he says, in a narrow race for the House majority, you can literally point to anything ever and say, this cost the House.
That's right.
Or
That's
vice
a new
versa.
hobby.
With Republicans barely being able to win the House. Redistricting, a flop of a campaign, an upset win, and what have you. We get it. So don't get me wrong, Chaz says. It's still fun to watch people get to play the blame game. And we're going to do that because I got a really nice set of gossip sheets, which are just fun. On any election ever this year. Haven't really seen anything like this since I've been predicting elections. It's a total free-for-all. Democrats lost the House because they didn't believe Boebert could lose. Republicans barely won because of Trump. He cost them seats. Sean Patrick Maloney was the worst DCCC chair of the 21st century.
One? Yeah.
Andy Levin cost the Democrats the House by choosing a carpetbag. Mastriano and Hochul brought their party down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no end.
I've seen those, yes.
And each one of those may be true, and none of them were the big picture. And that's what I mean about learning the wrong lessons.
All right. He's he's right about that there's 100 such stories, and his name is everywhere all of a sudden. Nutty Combs Big.
Nutty Combs Big.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's by the way, as we enter into the break, our update on breaking news, Darwin Darko tells us that the UVA shooting suspect is I'm sorry. I thought it said caught, but it just says sought. So
sought.
No,
yeah,
sorry.
Still sought.
Wow. All right,
yeah,
so unable to fix that one.
Be careful.
Yes. All right. Follow directions.
Also, today's the day that House freshmen arrive for orientation. You know what that's like.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Yeah, everybody has to learn the ropes and be taught what to do. And some of the people who may be there attending and claiming that they want to be told how to select an office, etc., may still be told, but you're not actually a member of Congress. That happens too in these close races. Both sides send their candidate, and they both show up and get oriented. So, all right, we'll sort that one out, and then everything else in 2 minutes. Luckily, we can do that sort of thing.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, or the Capitol Building, or the White House. I don't know. Whatever you think you're storming, you're here. Go for it.
So I'm going for it. This is from Punch Bowl, and this is like one of my favorite parts of the show ever, the part that David hates and the one I like, which is put David on the spot about rules. And I'm going to do this from Punch Bowl News because basically what happened is McCarthy probably, he certainly wants to be Speaker, but in order to be Speaker, he has to get enough votes from people to be Speaker. Right. And what will he have to give up in order to get those votes? Now, we won't even talk about how dysfunctional it's going to be afterwards, but what kind of promises do we have to make? So this is from Punch Bowl, okay? And the fun part is David's an expert, but he doesn't know what I'm going to say, so he's going to have to come up on the spot, what does that mean? So
you got to vote for everything. That's the answer. Yes.
So we got a sense of what conservatives are demanding from McCarthy, says Punch Bowl. Essentially, they want to neuter the GOP leadership by revising the rules package that's scheduled to be adopted by the Republican conference on Wednesday. This effort's being led by Andy Biggs, Scott Perry, another insurrectionist, and Bob Good, who happens to be from David's Virginia, but David's not responsible for him, among others.
And he's bad.
They floated a number of proposed amendments to the leadership-drafted rules package. Okay, and this is what I want to talk to you about. Conservatives, and by this we mean the House Freedom Caucus, want members of each committee to elect their chairs instead of the GOP steering committee. What's that mean?
What? Say that again. They want
The House Freedom Caucus
Yeah.
wants the individual committee to elect their chairs
Okay.
rather than
I
get
see.
advice from the GOP steering committee as to who the chair should be.
Okay, so yeah, the membership of the committee would be doing the voting rather than usually the conference at large will say, all right, hey, everybody in the GOP conference, who do you want to be chairman of this committee? And everybody, even people who aren't on that committee, vote. And they would rather say, I think the members of, the 12 to 17 people on this committee.
That McCarthy picked.
Well, in many cases, yeah. I mean, how you get onto those committees is controlled by the leadership currently too, and I don't know whether they just think that's too big a bite to try and go after and control that too, but
Probably not, because they're doing it this way. So in other words, they're stepping back and saying, look, Kevin McCarthy,
once we get
as a
on the
price
committee-
for us voting for you, you have to agree that instead of you, in effect, picking the chairs of the committees, the committee will pick the chair of the committee.
Yeah, so it's a possibility that he may lose control of the committee. Although, I guess the other way they could have handled it is in order for us to vote for you for speaker, you need to make Jim Jordan the chairman of every committee, or whatever it is.
Except for the one that Marjorie Taylor Greene chairs.
Right. So they may end up being the same people. It might not be that big a concession, but it is a concession of clout and power, and that's why he wanted to be the speaker, and so he's not going to want to give that up, even if they land on the same people.
The next one we're all familiar with, and that's basically going back to disgraced Hastert rule, majority of the majority. Nothing gets to the floor unless it's a majority of the majority.
Okay, well, they weren't bringing anything anyway, so maybe that's all right.
In addition, they want any amendment that gets 10% support in the conference to be ruled in order. What does that mean?
Well, just like it sounds, in order to get it sounds pretty simple. I don't know if I'm explaining anything, but to bring an amendment, ordinarily, an amendment is ruled in or out of order by bringing it to the Rules Committee, which is usually very much leadership controlled, and you make your case for it. And there's lots of reasons why the leadership often will exclude amendments. They're, distracting. They're not helpful for the real purpose of the bill, or they are otherwise extraneous, or they're contentious, or they're going to cause, they have all sorts of reasons for keeping things tight and focused. And it's very difficult to get an amendment to the floor. And the Rules Committee generally, likes to have strict control of what's happening. They want to know, for scheduling purposes, how long is this bill going to take? And that's a very interesting ask for this Congress, where they might have like a one vote majority.
Yeah.
And I will remind everybody too, there's been lots of people saying, every time there's a death or a resignation, control of the House could change. And well, that's entirely true. More routinely, every day, if you ever look at the roll call voting results, every vote every day, there's routinely 5 to 10 members of Congress are just absent. They're sick,
And that's
they're away.
with rules that
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi passed
Right.
that said you're allowed to have proxy votes.
Yes.
They want to get rid of that.
Right.
So
We haven't gotten to that yet.
that'll make it even worse.
They want to get rid of that because proxy voting was used essentially to defeat them in everything they wanted to do, because Democrats were staying home because they either had COVID or feared COVID, or it was just wise to stay away because of COVID. That made Republicans angry because they didn't believe in COVID and they were losing the votes. So
Right. So,
the
but
knee-jerk
I guess what I'm
thing
saying
is,
here is what they're really trying to do is
there's
make
too
the
much
House even
involved
more
to give you an
dysfunctional
answer.
than it is. They want to
don't
get
know that,
around the
though.
GOP steering committee.
yes,
Apparently, they want to get around the Rules Committee.
yes.
There's
Those
another
are
proposal
leadership
that say that they
controls.
want to say over the makeup of the Rules Committee, and that it's not just up to McCarthy.
Yes, but and in the end, it may not be such
And
a
they want to be
sacrifice.
able to bring whatever amendment they want without McCarthy saying you can't do that. That's stupid.
Yes, they want to be able to do that, but what they don't realize is, one, most of them have never been in a functioning majority and don't know what it takes to run a house, and two, they will later realize if they get everything they want, there will be weeks on end, where the Republican House is unable to bring anything to the floor. They will dare not bring any measure to the floor. They'll be going to be naming post offices for months at a time. Because if you have a controversial bill of any kind, and believe me, Marjorie Taylor Greene, all she'll want on the floor and we'll have 10% support for amendments to it. So we're going to bring all crazy amendments to this crazy bill that nobody wants and is going nowhere. They don't have the Senate. They're going to be vetoed by Biden. They'll think messaging bill, whatever. And it might be enormously popular among their crazy people, but they'll bring it to the floor. And guess what? A Republican got a cold today, and you're just going to lose outright because today there's more Democrats present than Republicans. And that's why, you can't do things like that. You can't be amending things with just 10% support over the objections of the Rules Committee. As annoying as it is to have the Rules Committee constantly saying no to everybody who wants to bring amendments, the Rules Committee, because they're connected to leadership, is very conscious of how many people have we got, how many votes have we got among the people we know we have, who's here today, who's not. This is going to lose because of this crazy person's amendment, and I got to risk the whole bill based on this. No, I can't. No, you can't decide. You don't know anything. We have to decide.
But now they want to codify that.
Great.
I mean,
Bad.
Not only do they want to do it the way we're talking about, but there's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
They are advocating not bringing any additional legislation. You said no legislation is actually going to functionally come out of this. They don't want to bring any additional legislation to the floor if Congress hasn't passed the spending bill by August 1st. They want that to be formal.
Oh, okay. Statutory on top of everything else, or just that's going to be in the rules?
That's going to be in the rules.
No legislation allowed to come to the floor unless they've passed what?
A spending bill.
A spending
all
bill.
spending bills by August 1st.
All right. Well, that ain't never going to happen.
As Punchbowl points out, as if the House could control what the Senate does.
There's that too, right? That's interesting too. So the Democratic Senate can shut down the Republican House for the rest of the year by saying we're going to pass it on August 2nd.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
Good
deal. We'll do it.
We did this to ourselves, and I don't understand how come it's not working. Okay.
Yes.
Next. Another proposed amendment would bar omnibus spending packages.
Well, I was going to say the only way you can take care of that August 1st deadline is if you say, well, all right, fine, spending bills have to be passed by August 1st. Well, we'll take that seriously.
I don't want you to think this hasn't been thought out here.
So you pass an omnibus spending bill to take care of it. Oh, those aren't allowed either? In other words, there's no, all right, the new rule is no legislating.
Whose side do you on anyway? Is this a Democratic package or a Republican package?
Wow, all right.
Okay, and the last thing, which I have to pat myself on the back because I brought this up to you months ago, the motion to vacate the chair.
Well, McCarthy will make that motion.
It's easier
now.
to take out a speaker by having the ability to force what's essentially a vote of confidence at any time. You will recall, listeners, that Nancy Pelosi changed those rules when she was in charge. It said, we'll have a motion to vacate the chair when leadership says you'll have a motion to vacate the chair. Including
your leadership. You have that right to make that motion. It just has to come from Kevin McCarthy. You can't just yell it from the back. Yeah. That makes sense. So they want to make it easier. Yeah, sure. And that's how the House Freedom Caucus began the process of taking out Boehner. Yeah, all right. So they must think that's a great McCarthy success. Strongly opposed this, preferring to stick to the current rule, which only allows the GOP or Democratic leadership to offer the motion. Sure. All right. Now, and that's not even a full list, Punchbowl says. Wow. So I'm looking at this and thinking, I don't get it. They really think they're going to have a functional Congress? Well, they all think that things would be functional if they only followed their advice. So I guess this is run in 2024 on my achievements. Yeah. No, they don't, but they want to run on something. But I guess this is a collection of, hey, have you ever tried to do something in Congress? You have. How did it go? If it didn't work, and you were told you couldn't do it because of the rules, write down what you couldn't do, and we'll offer you a chance to change that rule, even if it's internally contradictory. Well, Congressman A says, I wasn't able to pass my amendment because of this rule. All right, we'll get rid of that rule. Congressman B says it was, their problem was because of that rule. All right, well, we'll get rid of that rule. All right, well, as it happens, you just got rid of two rules that are either complementary or contradictory. You can't get rid of both in the same way. And now now you're not allowed to pass any legislation at all somehow. All right. But let's do that explicitly. Let's say you can't. No legislation can come to the floor Now, that's interesting, too. So I wonder how they wrote that. So if no legislation can come to the floor unless you've passed your spending bills by August 1st, something happens. They don't pass their spending bills by August 1st. So August 2nd comes around and you say, man, we got to pass a spending bill so we can bring legislation. You bring your bill to the floor and then somebody says, it looks like we wrote this very poorly, it seems, but that is legislation. Can we consider that legislation?
Well, can you deem it not legislation?
I guess you could try and do that.
Congress is so weird.
But they don't know. Yeah, they may not know that, right? So we're trying to bring the legislation to the floor here, but we can't because the rule says you can't bring legislation unless the spending bills are passed. I know, but I'm bringing the spending bill. I know, but that is also legislation. Oh.
So,
but they may mean budget, which is not legislation, so I don't know.
Yeah, the whole thing is, let's just say it's a little muddled at the moment. Tara Palmieri is writing in Puck.
Budget wouldn't be in August.
And she has a lovely gossip sheet today about all the people blaming everybody else at this particular point in time. Maybe we'll do a little bit on the Senate if we get there. But basically, Rick Scott wanted to run against Mitch McConnell and then did so poorly he couldn't, but he might anyway.
Oh, well, all right.
How do we know this? Because Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and a bunch of luminaries in the Republican and conservative world are suggesting that they put off the leadership vote for a while, meaning not reelect McConnell right away while they try to figure out what's going on. So more to come on that.
Okay, I guess.
But as we were talking about the House, let's finish with that. Kevin McCarthy, meanwhile, she writes, is primed to have the hardest job in Washington. He may become Speaker. I'm not even sure he will. But he may become Speaker, but likely by the slimmest of margins. Basically, he's screwed.
Yeah.
As I mapped out back in September, she says, McCarthy's facing his own Paul Ryan-esque nightmare between the former president's mind games, members like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are ready to politically extort him. Will he be a strangled leader living under the thumb of the right-wing Freedom Caucus who may only agree to vote for him if he concedes to change the rules by allowing just one member to call a motion to vacate leadership? This motion to vacate is like a thing.
Yeah.
For now, there's no obvious challenge to McCarthy, so he'll likely win the race. But after what concessions? Steve Scalise is number 2, will surely be there. There's always the possibility of a dark horse, blessed by the Freedom Caucus if they can get their act together. Politico reported that some of these members are asking for next week's leadership election to be delayed, so not only on the Senate side, but the House side.
Let's delay the whole Congress.
Perhaps they have enough time to find that challenger or squeeze out some concessions.
Or not.
In the midst of this, everybody's blaming everybody else and blaming Robert Cahaly of Trafalgar.
Oh? Why?
Well, he's convenient.
Okay. What did he do?
Well, he said that the Republicans are going to win, and they didn't.
Oh. Well, sort of. I mean, they thought, okay, so more Republicans were going to win so that more people could have more demands about the rules package that don't mean anything.
He's the biggest culprit of the Republican polling hype machine, this says. The mustached, red bow tie wearing Robert Cahaly of Trafalgar, who has a history of overinflating Republican odds. People are saying, I literally never want to hear that name again, said one senior Senate staffer. Cahaly lit himself on fire, said the first operative. It's not entirely fair to Cahaly when so many GOP pollsters also got over their skis.
Okay.
But his partisan boosterism and unconventional methods appear to have placed a target on his back. And I've spoken to some pollsters who are happy to shoot at him because they just, let's just say they don't think he's anything more than opaque in terms of his methods.
Okay.
I reject the term that I boost Republicans. I've never done that in my career, Cahaly told me. It's unfair to criticize us being out there for the last week, and so many mainstream media polls avoided this. So, his point is, well, I polled these people. Even if I got it wrong, I was out there polling. Where are these mainstream people who are criticizing me? They weren't even out there giving us fair polls. I guess that's what he's saying.
I don't know. All right. So he went to talk to people in a diner and thinks you should leave him alone.
Right.
All right.
That
worked for the press.
About diners, too. Along the lines of, okay, so they went out during the day and they talked to people in diners. Who the hell is in a diner in the middle of the day? Who did they think they were talking to?
Yeah, right. There was 100% support for an increase in dining spending.
Hold the job. I mean, what do they think?
Maybe they're talking to the employees. We should be...
Come back at night. You get a totally different crowd.
Could be. There should be 100% tax deduction for dishwashers? Okay, that's weird.
Haley, of course, is one of Trump's favorite pollsters ever since he called Michigan for him in 2016, but he doesn't actually pay him for his polling. And again, to be fair, he got a lot of things right back then, and he was ranked top pollster by Real Clear Politics, which itself is getting a ton of criticism.
They're not real clear.
But in the midterms, he royally screwed up Michigan. He had Tudor Dixon down by 3 points. She lost by 10. In New Hampshire, he had Don Bolduc up by 1, and Maggie Hassan won by 9. Haley rejects the criticism. I said New York was competitive. I had the best poll in North Carolina. Some silver liners suggest he inadvertently did the party a favor since his rosier polls may have galvanized donors, but if that's not DC's spin, what is? Like donors. Okay. It's all about donors, is it?
Kebabs, you mean.
Right. Exactly. So, you step back and look at the big picture here. It's pretty clear there was no such thing as a red wave, except there was in specific areas like Florida and New York, and a lot of the reporters are out of New York. And so that certainly got something of an influence. But at the same time, they totally missed the concept, probably because they're all white male anonymous Republican consultants, that this abortion thing might have some legs here. And in fact, they did, but in specific areas, but not everywhere. I mean, it didn't affect the Ohio Senate race in terms of changing outcome. It didn't change the Ohio governor race in terms of the wine sailing, but it probably did have an impact in the swing states, the true swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan for sure, where it was literally on the ballot, and, Wisconsin, where Tony Evers won.
Yes.
Mandela Barnes did not win.
No.
As you know, I don't think he was a very good candidate, but I said that.
Wow.
I've been saying that. But I don't know if they could have gotten anybody better. It is what it is. It's disappointing. But I don't think he was a great fit for Wisconsin at this particular point in time, and said so before the election. Tony Evers pulled it off.
Yeah. Well,
he was a better fit. Of course, he was also an incumbent, had some advantages, but nonetheless.
That's true.
People can split tickets. They did split tickets in Pennsylvania, where both John Fetterman and Shapiro won their races. And there's a really interesting dialogue I was having with the data guy from Catalyst about debates. We were debating about
debates. All right.
Yeah. And this came from a comment that Nate Cohen made. No projections in the Arizona governor, but make no mistake, Lake didn't get the tally she wanted and probably needed more out of Maricopa. It'll presumably close further, but Lake doesn't have many batches left, so each time she falls short, her target in the outstanding vote gets higher. So, in other words, now she needs like 70% of the vote that's left in tonight's, and I don't think she's going to get that. She's been getting like 54 at best. So if it goes up because it's a redder area, maybe she'll get 60. Not going to be enough. So Nate writes this, and Tom Nichols, Radio Free Tom, one of the Never Trumpers, says, if Katie Hobbs wins this, I and a lot of other people have a big plate of crow to eat about not debating Carrie Lake. Hobbs refused to debate Lake.
Yes. Good. All right.
Right. Hobbs will have shown that some candidates are just beneath serious engagement and so obviously terrible that the voters don't need a debate to make up their minds.
This was really a gutsy thing.
Yeah. And I remember we were having this discussion about the Fetterman debate. I'm in the camp of I don't think debates matter that much.
Yeah.
And it turns out that with the Fetterman debate, what little data we have on it suggests the debate actually helped Fetterman, which I also said at the time, because as bad as Fetterman's debate was from an optics point of view, Oz was so smarmy, he was worse. And that's what the voters said.
Yeah. All right.
The voters said, I get that Fetterman looks like he's a little bit more affected by his stroke than we thought, but with a stroke, he'll get better. Oz is going to be Oz. We're not voting for him.
Yeah, well, there is that. There are two people at that debate,
Right.
and then there was backlash against the backlash.
So,
yeah.
I said, and so this guy from Catalyst was saying, it's you have to understand that we're owed debates. It's like bad not to do them.
That is the conventional wisdom.
And so that's the conventional wisdom. And, I took a slightly different approach to that and said, what if, for the sake of argument, it turns out that it was okay. It's an odd sitch I wrote, because it might have been right for Fetterman to debate and Hobbes not to.
Yes.
Regardless of what the outcome was.
That's
because Fetterman said he felt like he had the show because he felt like he did.
All right, then.
And Hobbes said her opponent was unworthy. And what if they were both right?
That is.
And what if, as a bonus,
situational
authenticity happens to be the winning move? And Jonathan Robertson from Catalyst said, these questions are unanswerable. All's well that ends well. And I said, well, I guess. But just because they're unanswerable doesn't mean there aren't the right questions. To which he said, well,
fair.
Quotes Alder's razor, if something cannot be settled by experiment or observation, it is not worthy of debate. I didn't get back to him on that, but I'm thinking, okay, so you negated all of Shakespearean literature then? Is that what you're saying?
I
mean, this is, when you're a data guy,
yeah.
And this gets back to the bigger picture of how Real Clear Politics and Nate Silver and some of these guys approach politics. Like, if it's not in the numbers, it's not real, it doesn't count.
I mean, that's a place
there's
to start.
More to it than just that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, all right, that's fair. And you're kind of a data guy yourself.
I went to an engineering school.
Yeah,
I'm
so
okay
you say,
with the data, but sometimes
data's a good
it's
place
more
to
than that.
start. And then right, and then sometimes, all right, maybe there are some intangibles here. The data says this, but there's a reason to believe that.
I mean,
that's
it's like when you're a doctor and you go and you interview a patient. And you say, listen, I have the data on what's going on here. I have your labs. I have everything else. What you think doesn't matter. Just listen to what I have to say. What kind of a doctor is that?
I don't know.
Not a good one.
No. But
well,
it might be one.
What about politics? Well, I'm a data guy. Well, what about what the voters think? What about if the voters are complicated and it isn't just one thing they vote on? Well, I don't know. The data can't really. Well, then, if the data can't do it, then you got to go by other things. Maybe you should do focus groups. Oh, we can't do that. That's not data. Well, okay, fine. You're going to miss what people are saying if you're not listening to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big limitation of the data is that a vote is a binary thing. It's either entered into your data as a 1 or a 0, but there's no accounting for how many reasons there are why it was a 1 or a 0.
Right, and I'm not saying he's right or I'm right or Tom's. It was an interesting discussion. And as you start to have the discussion, you realize that the place where you're coming from, where you make a living by doing data, is not going to allow you to step back and look at a bigger picture and be a little introspective about what's going on here.
All right. And if you'd like to do that,
even though he's an expert at what he does.
You go as far as the numbers can take you. That's great.
Much.
But then, all right, after that, you're at a loss, and you keep looking like you're wrong, though. I mean,
well, so
you get either a 1 or a 0 for the campaign.
That talk about it's kind of a Rashomon thing. You show somebody, and then 87 different people have 87 different interpretations of what you just saw.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw the Mike Pence interview with David Muir on ABC.
Of course not. But I have seen people seeing it.
Yeah. Well, there's a tiny clip.
Yeah.
That I had about David Muir asking him about, how do you react to what Trump did?
All right.
And basically, what I found fascinating about that in that moment as I was looking at it was the fact that it was how Muir was doing the interview.
Isn't that
I posted
racist?
about that.
Oh, sorry.
And most people said, yeah, that's really interesting. I'll tell you what it is in a minute. But then I got a whole slew of things about saying, yeah, I didn't like Pence's answer. That's not the point I was trying to make about this.
All right. Well, no one likes
David Muir asked a question. Pence didn't answer him. Muir didn't say anything. There was a really pregnant pause, painful silence. Then Pence started to tap his foot. You could watch the video even if you don't listen to it because it's only a few seconds.
Huh.
Then he answers. In other words, the silence of Muir's interview forced Pence to answer. It was really masterfully done, and that's what struck me, and that's what I was talking about.
Huh.
And then people started talking about what Pence's answer was. Well, that's important, but not the point I was making.
All right.
So you watch Pence, he gets really nervous about, and basically he blurted the truth.
That's the
It's
worst.
really fascinating, well worth watching. Just
All right.
like just a few seconds, and then he
I'll
finally
go look
blurts
for
out,
that.
"The president's words were reckless. They endangered me and my family and everybody at the Capitol building." Like, why didn't you say that over the last 2 years? But
Right.
Muir made him say it. It was really, really interesting.
All right. That is an interesting perspective, because I did see people talking about that answer, but yeah, maybe more interesting is the few
Just
seconds
watch it
of
in
non-answer
It's really short,
first.
and
Yeah.
worth a look.
I'll have to take a look and see maybe if you have a clip that has got
I
it.
did. I
'cause
just sent it to you.
Okay.
It's in that tweet
Well.
at the very bottom of.
Oh, okay, good. Because I'm betting that there's a lot of clips of it circulating where they were like, "Oh, it's silence. Cut that out."
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
Wait a second. I need to see that.
Well, I'll send you the
All right.
exact clip. I sent you my comment, but I'll send you the exact clip.
I
And there it is.
want
And so
both.
now you have it.
Okay. I would play it, but A, it's mostly silence, and B, we're out of time for our.
Well,
it
you'll
took us
actually
to an
have
hour.
time to see it during the break.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
you
all
can
right.
decide what you want to do with it.
And it's only a minute this break. So you can tell that it's only a few seconds. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. All right. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour and ends our segment for today. I think you should do two more this week, if you don't mind.
Well, we'll do one Wednesday and maybe Thursday.
All right. Yes.
We'll see.
Okay. It's always a we'll see. I mean, if you don't, how about this? If you haven't had your segment by Wednesday, no more segments are allowed for the rest of the year, and you get to vacate the host
Yeah, we'll
job.
talk
in the
about
show.
significant seconds and calling the previous question.
Okay. Wow. So I got to take a look at their rules package, except they'll never print it. I'll never get a chance to look at it before it's thrown in the garbage. Well, it's internally contradictory, but I guess you should believe, you should have guessed that that was going to be the case. All right. Great. Well, we'll catch up with you again on Wednesday. We'll just, we'll wander around Lost with Joan tomorrow. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess there's really no way for me to. I spoke to Greg for a few seconds more, and that means this is a 50-second clip, and we had a 1-minute break, and I can't. But I see what we're getting at. Anyway, I'll be able to provide it to all of you for you to take a look at in case you didn't see it. I guess we could play it on the air too. Or should we take the one with his comment? I mean, I guess if they're the same clip, are they the same 50 seconds? Yeah, so we could use Greg's, and I'll bookmark that one. But ABC has this. I mean, it's got the same. The clip in your thing is 50 seconds, and the clip in ABC's is 50 seconds. Is this the same? Okay. He's. I would say waving frantically at me, but he's just, typing notes calmly into Skype. So they are the same. So I guess what I can, let's spend 50 seconds on it. I'll spend 50 seconds on almost anything. What the hell am I doing? Oh, yes, right. I'm going to Pocket, where I pocketed Greg's tweet about it, which embedded the ABC 50-second clip. Let me go to the original. We'll do it on the big board computer. And I think Twitter is okay with doing this still. We haven't had that cut off at all by Elon Musk. I guess we can turn this up. Oh, do we want to turn up the volume on the input from Twitter? There's a lot going on here. Well, let's punch it to the 3X button and see what happens. Okay, let's roll it. Here we go. 50 seconds of David Muir, who I usually don't want to listen to, and Mike Pence, who I almost never want to listen to, together combining to not say something that I do want to listen to. How do you like that? All right, 50 seconds, 10 seconds of which is apparently silence.
Members were barricaded inside the House chamber. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of it all, you can see that the president has tweeted.
This isn't the silence that Greg was talking about, but I had to stop it for a second. One, so that ABC News doesn't contact YouTube and say this is unfair use of our intellectual property, but the other, is just the gravity of what he's talking about. You and other members, you're barricaded inside the Capitol. There is an insurrection, a violent insurrection going on outside. Possible that you and other members of Congress could be abducted or even murdered. And the future of America's democracy is at stake. And in the middle of it all, you can see what? Troops arriving, helicopters outside, SEAL Team 6 coming through the door? No. You can see that the president put the nuclear forces on alert? No. The president tweeted. That strikes me as so amazing a conclusion to the sentence. In the middle of this crisis, you can see the president has tweeted. It doesn't even matter what he tweeted. Now, I mean, it does. In a second, you'll find out why, although you know what but just the fact that the president is tweeting at all should have been remarkable. But the fact that he's tweeting in the middle of this thing and about this thing, and I'm going to solve this problem by tweeting an answer to it. All right. I got in the way of the purpose of this clip, but let's roll the rest. Maybe.
2:24 p.m., the president tweets, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done.
It angered me.
Okay, well, that is a pregnant pause, isn't it? I guess that's a good, 15 seconds? Maybe not. Maybe I should replay that and we'll count. But on the other hand, I will say, I think I'm with Pence on that one just for a second. Like, did you ask a question, David? I don't know what the setup was. We didn't hear what comes before this whole thing, but he says, all right, and you're barricaded in, things are terrible. The president tweets, and then he dramatically reads that the president tweets that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what was right. And I mean, I think at that moment, Pence in this interview was saying, so I'm expecting that he'll then say, so did you feel that the president did or didn't understand what was going on at that time? Or what do you make of that? Or how did that make you feel? And he just doesn't ask that. He just looks at him. And then I guess Mike Pence is like, boy, this is quiet in here. I think he thinks it's my turn. So I guess I should say something. And he does. He says, it angered me. Where does the silence begin? Let's see. All right. All right. Yeah, that's true. So Greg is like, what is this, Jeopardy? It has to be in the form of a question. I mean, I guess I can almost sympathize with Pence. Like, I listened to that too, and I was like, oh, is this where the silence starts? Because what's the question here?
So
here we
you
go.
can see that the president has tweeted. 2:24 p.m., the president tweets, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done.
Okay, so that's where... So he hasn't asked the question. But it is interesting that... I mean, as an interview technique, if this was a conscious decision by David Muir, and it is David Muir, so, if he's in the room, then you go... So master interview technique. If he's not in the room, you're free to say, what the hell? Did he know that he was going to answer? It looks like, I mean, he's right. Greg's right. He does pressure him to answer just by sitting there. And maybe it's even better not to ask a question, because if you ask a question, he can dodge or answer in ways that you do. How did that make you feel? Well, it made me feel very strongly. I mean, what if that's the answer, right? I don't know. So maybe the best thing to do here is to not ask the question. But at 19 seconds into this 50-second clip, Muir stops speaking. That's the best you can say about it. And then what happens? And so Greg is saying, watch Pence's foot taps. Pence's foot is tapped. I thought he was saying that Muir was tapping his foot like, when are you going to answer or say something? But Pence is just uncomfortable. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I think he's waiting for a question mark. So at 19, he's done speaking, Muir is. And then the silence. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Pence is nodding. 25. 26, 27, there's the foot tap. 28, okay. So about 10 seconds, And yeah, the foot tap, there's some nodding, there's some hand movement. Yeah, Muir's just sitting there. And that's the answer. It angered me. Which I guess sure, it did. So now we're almost at 30 seconds. There's 20 seconds of this left. What else is in store here? More foot tapping.
But I turned to my daughter, who was...
Then another 5 seconds of silence. It angered me. And then Muir says nothing. And then, Pence realizes I probably should have something to say about this situation. I guess that's it. And then, as Greg says, Greg, you know how Greg says it. Now he BS's, or as Greg always puts it.
That's bullshit.
So, okay. Well, let's finish now. How much more could Pence have to say in this?
Standing nearby.
My daughter
And
was
I said,
standing
it
nearby.
doesn't take courage to break the law. It takes courage to uphold the law. I mean, the president's words were reckless. It was clear he decided to be part of the problem.
All right, so there you go. Now you've seen the 50-second, and he gets better at the end and addresses the actual, well, not actual question, but addresses the situation he's been put in by having David Muir read a Trump tweet at him 2 years later. I don't know. That is kind of bizarre, but it seems clear to me that Pence, I guess, thought that there was going to be an actual question asked of him at some point. And no, it didn't come. But at least he had, I guess, eventually the presence of mind to say, I guess you should say something. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens a lot in interviews like that, too. And then at the end product, they edit out those pauses. You know, how they normalize people and make it look like they aren't hemming and hawing about their answers. But here, David Muir probably was in on the editing process and said, you got to leave that in. I mean, the tension in the room, you should have been there. You got to see this thing. So kudos to him if that's indeed true and he recognized the true meaning of that pregnant pause. And he carried that pregnant pause to term, that's for sure. Very interesting. All right, thanks, Greg, for bringing that to bear. And now when I go around taking a look, will I see that or will I see? Because all I really saw was people saying, right, like Greg said, focusing on the answer of, well, he does say the president was reckless, and why didn't he say that when there was an impeachment going on? He could have made a real difference, could have saved his whole party a whole lot of heartache, and all of us a lot of heartache over the last couple of years, but he didn't do it because maybe he's right. Trump was right. He has no courage. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot going on there in that exchange. Right in the most meaningful part is the part where neither of them are saying anything to the other. So that's pretty unusual and rare all by itself. All right, let's see. We've got a couple other subjects to cover. I have many of them tucked away in pocket, and some of them are going to have to be pulled up to remind myself of what's going on here. Oh, yeah, well, let's see. The people talking about the very narrow majority that's likely to be in the House, no matter who runs the House, whose hands it lands in. And apparently it's still technically possible that it could land in Democratic hands, but I guess as time goes by and they call more and more of these races, even though the weekend has been full of calling races where Democrats have surprised everybody and won despite all the odds, and the people tracking the outstanding races have said, well, in order for the Democrats to win control of the House, I think the situation was something like there are, 10, 12 races outstanding in which the Democrats are currently leading in the vote count. And they need to hang on and win in every single one of those. And there are 5 toss-ups out there, and they have to win all of those. And they also have to win, I don't remember exactly what it was, 1 or 2 races where Republicans are currently leading, but it's close. And if Democrats can somehow flip the vote count and win everything that they're already leading in, and win X number of the toss-ups, and turn around some of these where the Republicans are leading, then they'll win. And so while they would have success after success, closing out races that they were leading, and even flipping or winning a toss-up or two, and even flipping ones where they should never have won in the first place by, according to the odds makers, but there's still a long march ahead, and you still have to hit on every single one of the ones you're leading in. And, for every flip, as exciting as it is, you need two more. So, at any rate, that's why I think the odds makers are still have it as a narrow Republican House. So everyone's beginning to contemplate what that might mean. What I saw this morning was of great interest. Lots of people talking about it and talking about it with each other, or at least quote tweeting one another. Michael Lee, who serves as, according to his Twitter bio, redistricting and voting counsel at the Brennan Center and NYU Law, was reacting to something that everybody's Twitter pal Taniel had to say about things. And I don't know which was the more interesting. Taniel had originally said, if it is a 218-217 GOP House, the over 700,000 residents of Democratic Washington, D.C. being denied all congressional representation will be what clinches the GOP majority. As Greg was saying, everybody has different views of what is the make or break here. As he said, lots of people spent the weekend saying Democrats in New York State screwed things up by not pressing a partisan advantage in drawing congressional district lines when it was available to them. Of course, available to them according to whom? We mentioned that there were several states where the high courts in those states said your maps are unfairly partisan. And in New York, they were told that. And in New York, the Democrats in control of the redistricting process said, okay, we'll redraw them. Which, on its face, all by itself in a vacuum might have been, well, maybe you could see why that might be the right thing, the quote unquote right thing to do. In the meantime, though, out in Ohio and in a couple of other states where they had this problem where Republicans were drawing the maps and the high courts in those states said, these are unfairly partisan, you need to redraw them. They just said, no. We're not gonna. I mean, some of them, went around in circles, hemming and hawing, saying the sorts of things that allow them to point to their delays and say it was just a matter of legal confusion, when all it really was a delaying tactic. But they just went ahead and had the elections with the unfair districts in place and won more seats than they should have. And if you're talking about 1 or 2 seats as the difference between majority and minority in the House, some one state alone could make that difference, let alone 3 or 4 states where Republicans ignored the courts and said, we'll run on unfairly partisan maps. That's got to be the difference. Here, though, Taniel making a different point entirely, which is about the lack of voting representation at all in the House for the 700,000 residents of Washington, D.C., who have only a non-voting delegate available to them. And when Democrats are in control, they do allow the D.C. delegate and other delegates from other territories to cast votes in the committee of the whole, but not on the House floor for final passage when the House is acting as the House. That's all complicated nonsense. But the last thing, in order to not get caught up in it, it's fair to get away with the less nuanced but still true answer that the delegate from D.C. is a non-voting delegate. But that was a good point, too. Michael Lee talking about the 218-217 world in response to that, or in a 219-216, or even 220-215 world, for that matter. There will be no shortage of what-ifs. But he says, for me, the most immediate is the failure to create additional black congressional districts in Alabama, Louisiana, and Georgia, despite court orders holding that the Voting Rights Act required just that. Here in those cases, not necessarily the local or the state Supreme Court saying, well, your maps are unfairly partisan, but federal courts saying not only are they unfairly partisan, but they are facially discriminatory against black voters as well in violation of the Voting Rights Act. And those states simply said, no, they aren't, until they got so close to the election that they could also say, no, they aren't, but even if they are, we can't redo them because it's too close to the election, and therefore you have to let us have facially discriminatory federal elections for Congress, and then people can sue us later on if they want to. But first, we get to control Congress for at least 2 years. But as Michael Lee goes on to say, in Alabama and Louisiana, because SCOTUS used its shadow docket to stay decisions ordering the creation of new black districts in time for the 2022 election. In Georgia, it was because the court did a self-Purcell, as he refers to it here, and didn't even try to order a 2022 remedy. So a little bit of insider lingo there, but you get the idea, is that he's pointing out that in some cases, the Supreme Court getting in the way and delaying things, or using its shadow docket to stay lower court decisions that would have taken care of the problem in time, but then they get stuck because the Supreme Court issues a stay, but then never revisits the topic in time to actually help them make any decisions or do anything before the election. And again, if you're talking about just a few seats, that has to be pointed at as absolutely influential here. It may not be the only reason that things came out that way, but, you know, it could have been the difference. If that was the one thing that had changed, then those other factors that may have led to a Republican majority may have been overcome. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. But meanwhile, there's also another way of analyzing things that is of some interest. You may have been watching all along Charles Gaba and his tracking of COVID-19 deaths and tracking it by counties and by census tracts and all sorts of various metrics, but attempting to try to predict / measure. Maybe you forgot about this in the excitement of the election, but to try to find out whether essentially COVID denialism in extraordinarily red districts and tracts and counties and whatever led to an imbalance in the likelihood of death from COVID-19. And it clearly did. And then people began to wonder as the elections were approaching, you know, what about if some of these, like, it was interesting because we were focusing at that point on the most heavily red districts because they were putting up the most ridiculously obvious numbers of excess deaths that were preventable, but people essentially committed suicide by listening to Trump and the MAGA Republicans about COVID, and it ended up dying. But eventually you started to wonder, well, what about in places where it's a little closer, where the divide between Republican and Democrat might be more narrow, but they're still diehard MAGA Republicans and not getting vaccinated and not wearing masks and then therefore dying? Will there be places where the outcome of the vote is changed because so many Republicans who intended to vote for the MAGA Republicans in the election died instead, too early to cast their votes? And it turns out, again, if you're really talking about the difference in the majority being one seat, and if you're really talking about elections in some places being settled by hundreds of votes at most, if not even less, then yeah, it'll make a difference. And so you have data where in this particular piece of the thread I picked up, but I guess there's a lot more. He was saying if Katie Hobbs or Chris Mays end up winning, I guess one of the other statewide candidates running in Arizona, if they end up winning by less than 4,100 votes, there is a very strong argument to be made. It's not conclusive, but a strong argument to be made that it was the GOP COVID death cult which was the decisive factor. In Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto looks like she's outside Nevada's 2,100 vote range. But, if you lost 2,100 or 4,000 in the case of Arizona, and Arizona lost a lot of people, registered Republicans died of COVID, and then, if more Republicans died of COVID than there were in the margin of victory for the Democratic candidate, you gotta wonder, did they do this to themselves? And, I kind of like the thought that might be the case. I thought I might share that with you. You might be similarly moved. Okay, let's see. I got to cover this one. I think New York Times has an article that we just got to get to. Maybe I'll save that one for the last segment, though, because that looks like a long read. Trump wanted IRS investigations of foes, top aide says. Now, you probably guessed already that this was going on and this was going to be on Trump's wish list. Maybe because he kept saying, this is on my wish list. I believe people should be investigated by the IRS. And now I guess the question is, did it ever go beyond him tweeting, I'm going to get you with the IRS? Did he ever instruct people to go ahead and start those investigations? So this is mostly, I think, a story. Michael Schmidt reporting for the New York Times, interviewing insiders who say, yeah, Trump kept asking me to do those things and I kept ignoring him and telling people not to do that stuff. But it, I guess, tends to indicate that he really believed people were actually going to follow his commands and launch these investigations, which, certainly we haven't heard much about things like that since Richard Nixon almost got impeached, but instead resigned when everybody found out how he was going to be using the powers of the federal government to target political enemies. And it was an outrage, and never again until, of course, the next Republican comes around. Anyway, let's see. There's lots of other things happening that I put aside, rules-based stuff, but I'm trying to look for something that we can fit in before our break. And I don't think that there is anything any longer. Everything's sort of a long read at this point. But maybe we'll start off with one that's split into bullet points so that we can break it up into before and after the break. In this case, Greg Sargent, once again, this time chiming in on 5 ways to, quote, crazy-proof the country against chaos from a GOP house. Let's see what he's got in mind. And we'll do one or two at a time, take our break, come back and finish up. Although Democrats shocked the political world by overperforming in this week's elections, this, of course, written last week, there's still a good chance Republicans will end up controlling the House, and if so, there will be zero time to waste. Lawmakers should use the lame duck period before the new Congress is sworn in to build safeguards against a GOP-controlled House's capacity to sow full-blown chaos. I'm sure he's talking about things like the debt ceiling and others. That's, in fact, number 1 on the list. But there's another paragraph on our way before we get to those numbers. This imperative doesn't just apply to Democrats. Plenty of Republicans, particularly in the Senate, discern the threats posed by a GOP House. They could join Democrats in acting for the good of the country and for the good of their own party as well. Political scientist Jonathan Bernstein calls this the crazy-proofing agenda, and in at least some of these cases, that's not much of an overstatement. Here are those 5 ways that they can act in the lame duck period if necessary. Number 1, diffuse future debt ceiling crises. House Republicans are already threatening to use potential breaches of the debt limit, which would trigger default and economic disaster, to extract policy concessions from President Biden and Democrats on other fronts. Congress should neutralize this weapon of extortion because even the mere playing of this game threatens severe damage. In the lame duck, Democrats in the Senate, joined by Republicans who recognize the threat, could raise the debt limit beyond what would be needed during the Biden presidency, or even much higher, rendering it void. Or Congress could transfer control of debt limit hikes to the Treasury Secretary. Senate Minority Leader still, thankfully, Mitch McConnell and other Republicans might see self-interested motives for this. Imagine Donald Trump, if you will, running for president next year while urging the MAGA-led House to do what? Things have jumped around a little bit, and it's time to introduce the music. But imagine Donald Trump running for president next year while urging a MAGA-fied House to maximize debt limit extortions to damage Biden. What incoming House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, or would he really resist? Would he be able to? Who knows? They vacate the chair on him. McConnell might not want to get caught between Trump and GOP senators who don't want to imperil the global economy. Any GOP House majority is now certain to be very narrow, and we'll see how that'll impact things after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Just wanted to get that in before the end of the music here. All right. Well, let's see. We were still in the middle of number one. Probably should have gotten through that, but we dawdled and wandered around reading Greg Sargent's list of 5 ways to crazy-proof the House, which he may or may not have borrowed entirely from who? Jonathan Bernstein, I think. Yes. Okay. We were just reading about how Mitch McConnell and other Republicans might be self-interested in moving to prevent the MAGA-fied House from being able to trigger a debt ceiling crisis. Any GOP House majority, now certain to be very narrow, though, which would only further empower the MAGA caucus to create chaos by withholding its support for debt limit hikes. McCarthy would be loath to raise the limits with Democrats because that could subject him to the MAGA caucus's wrath and possibly mean a leadership challenge. And that's something that they would almost certainly want to bring up a motion to vacate the chair thing for. He could fall on his sword and do that and save America and then go on a rehabilitation tour like Mike Pence, I suppose. But in the meantime, he'd lose his seat, or at least his speakership. But in truth, Greg Sargent continues, this is a no-brainer even if Republicans don't win the House. That is to say, to take care of it before the new House is sworn in, because the debt limit is a useless relic. There's no good faith reason to weaponize it, as it involves borrowing to cover spending Congress has already appropriated. Everyone should remember that. If 10 GOP senators won't act, and they rarely will, Democrats should use the simple majority reconciliation process to raise and neutralize it. Did he write something about using reconciliation at some point to end? Yeah, I mean, not that long ago, October 21st of this year. And I guess I should look over one of these write-ups one of these days to see whether anybody has checked to see that there are, in fact, available instructions in whatever our most recent active fiscal year budget document is, or whether they advocate some sort of emergency addendum to the budget to include new instructions or what. Anyway, on to number 2 for crazy proofing. Number 2 is reduce the risk of a stolen presidential election. So I guess we're talking about Electoral Count Act reform still, and there is still work to do there. There are other election thefts that can take place before that one, but I've talked myself blue in the face about that one over the last couple of days. No need to bring that one up again, I don't think. But just a reminder that everything you read nightmare scenario-wise about the ability of Congress to just say, to hell with it, we're going to elect a different president, also applies to saying, to hell with it, we're going to just select a different Congress as well. It's just we haven't seen that one play out in important terms in the past. We just had an insurrection on January 6, 2021, in which they attempted to actually overturn the results of a presidential election. And although we have seen attempts to overturn the results of a congressional election, it's just one seat at a time. We've seen that in the past, and the majority has never been in the balance. Of course, now, if it really is a one-seat advantage, any seat holds out the possibility of changing the partisan control of the chamber. And if they do it to 5 seats at a time, well, you could be considering this question serially. Or I guess they could do them all at once. Anyway, reduce the risk of a stolen presidential election. Still important, so let's read about it. A GOP House takeover would make the case for revising the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which dictates how Congress counts presidential electors, even stronger than it already is. In the wake of the 2024 presidential election, a GOP House anyway, could very well vote against counting legitimate electors from one or more swing states won by a Democrat. In this election, the ranks of election deniers in the House have grown. In another scenario, if Kari Lake becomes governor of Arizona, and that's looking less likely, she could certify sham electors for a losing GOP candidate. Lake has explicitly said she wouldn't have certified Joe Biden's electors. Or a GOP-controlled state legislature could defy a Democratic governor and try to appoint the loser's electors by itself. A GOP House could count such sham electors, potentially meaning a constitutional crisis or stolen election. I believe that's a constitutional crisis at the door right now. Hello, Constitution calling. You're in trouble. Reforms advancing in the Senate and House, of course, would help avert such scenarios. They would require Congress to count the correct electors. Oh, I see. They'd be required. By law, you say, eh? Okay. Mandate that governors certify electors in keeping with the rule of law and create frameworks for court challenges of abuses. Importantly, 10 Republican senators support this approach. It's in the interests of principled Republicans. If it's harder to pull off such a scheme, those Republicans will face less pressure from bad actors to execute it. That's possibly true. Even if Republicans don't win the House, Congress should do these reforms in the lame duck, while 10 GOP senators are still willing to support them. Though they may have changed their mind after the election. I don't know. Number 3, avert chaotic gridlock on immigration. McCarthy has already threatened that a GOP House will refuse any action on immigration until Republicans deem the border secure, which they never ever will. Good point. But some Senate Republicans support a compromise that would pump new funding into adjudicating asylum claims at the border and also into removing migrants who don't qualify. The lame duck Congress could try to pass something that combined with protections for hundreds of thousands of people brought here as children, which some Senate Republicans also support. Current protections for Dreamers are likely to perish entirely from court challenges, which would be an abominable humanitarian outcome. The asylum system badly needs more money and staffing, but after running a campaign saturated with vile invasion language, a Republican House cannot be expected to help Dreamers and would surely only support something like a full rollback of asylum. In the lame duck, Democrats can prod GOP senators to act on these fronts. Kerry Talbot, deputy director at the Immigration Hub, tells me, Greg Sargent, failure to support Dreamers and the asylum system now means more chaos later. But lots of competing interests. Number 4 here, prevent defunding of aid to Ukraine. Many Republicans genuinely seem to be on the right side here. After McCarthy suggested a GOP House might end military aid, U.S. military aid, to Ukraine, McConnell quickly declared Republicans would continue to support it. And the aid does have broad bipartisan support. That said, the MAGA caucus in the House could grow more powerful. MAGA celebrities such as Representative Murdery Trader Green are vowing total defunding, and a power struggle might unfold among Republicans over future aid if powerful right-wing media voices urge MAGA Republicans to oppose it. In fairness, some Republicans appear to want only to impose more oversight over aid to Ukraine as opposed to halting it. In principle, that could be done in good faith, but it could also end up being used as a stealth tool for defunding. Congressional scholar Norman Ornstein suggests another possibility. Republicans could withhold support for Ukraine aid as leverage to squeeze Biden for other concessions. Ukraine experts fear that drama around funding risks signaling unreliable support for Ukraine, prompting disarray among our allies. And quite honestly, we impeached the president the first time for his willingness to try to extort all sorts of things over Ukraine aid. So, this question has already been answered by previous impeachments in ways that make the answer fairly obvious, I think, at this point. For these reasons, Ornstein suggests Democrats should find 10 Republican senators now to support a long-term appropriation for Ukraine aid, and if that fails, pass one via reconciliation to give the president more flexibility to do what's necessary. And I don't know how reliable a vehicle reconciliation would be for something like just a straight expenditure on foreign aid. I don't know. But, I guess if you feel like you're going to get the votes to get past the filibuster, maybe you can find the votes to waive points of order against Ukraine aid in a reconciliation bill. And 5, the last one, protect investigations of Trump. After the Mar-a-Lago search, numerous Republicans called for defunding the FBI, which somehow didn't bother them very much in the campaign, even though it should have. Though that seems outlandish, a GOP House might attempt to defund investigations or prosecutions of Trump in a more targeted way. House Republicans are also expected to run hearings into ongoing law enforcement investigations of Trump. Here again, oversight could theoretically be exercised in good faith, but it can also be abused. And harassing or defunding investigators solely because they're targeting Trump is not good faith oversight. It's precisely the opposite. And if those investigations become a more serious threat to Trump, House Republicans would likely exercise leverage to defund them, perhaps with government shutdowns. So, Ornstein suggests a longer-term appropriation for the Justice Department should be considered. The lame duck Congress should do everything they can to lock in funding. The first 2 of these are no-brainers, no matter what happens in the House. The last 3 will be more urgent if Republicans do win control. Either way, Democrats should be ready to act and prod serious Republican lawmakers to join them. Today is their first day back, so I guess the prodding would begin now. And there won't be any sign of that yet, of course. But keep an eye out. That's the best I can tell you at this point. Okay, let's see. So other items that we need to share with you. Of course, there was the New York Times piece. I think we got to dive into that one. Despite the fact that it's the New York Times. I know, everyone groans. Trump wanted IRS investigations of foes, top aide says. Who was that top aide? John F. Kelly. How top was he? Well, he was White House Chief of Staff. That's pretty top. And he said that as president, Donald J. Trump wanted investigations into perceived enemies like James Comey, the former FBI director. That would have been so productive for you. Michael Schmidt is the reporter for this. While in office, President Donald J. Trump repeatedly told John F. Kelly, his second White House Chief of Staff, that he wanted a number of his perceived political enemies to be investigated by the IRS, Mr. Kelly said. Kelly, who was Chief of Staff from July of 2017 through the end of 2018, said in response to questions from the New York Times that Trump's demands were part of a broader pattern of him trying to use the Justice Department and his authority as president against people who had been critical of him, including seeking to revoke the security clearances of former top intelligence officials. I mean, he was just tweeting out that he wanted that done. Mr. Kelly said that among those Mr. Trump said, quote, we ought to investigate and, quote, get the IRS on, were former FBI Director James Comey and his deputy Andrew McCabe. His account of Trump's desires to use the IRS against his foes came after the revelation by the Times this summer that Comey and McCabe had both been selected for rare and highly intrusive audits by the tax agency in the years after Mr. Kelly left the White House, which is what the rest of us really call pretty conclusive proof that A, Trump indeed did want to do those things, and B, did order that those things be done. And I guess we could grant something to John Kelly here and say, C, John Kelly did in fact effectively prevent from happening while he was White House Chief of Staff. But the minute he was out, I guess we come to letter D here. Is that what we were doing? Letters. That Trump indeed did go ahead and do this. I mean, it's not, well, he wanted very badly to abuse the IRS and the Justice Department and press for political investigations of his perceived enemies. He actually did get them. He initiated them. They didn't, thankfully, go very far because I guess people like John Kelly delayed him for long enough that he either got distracted or ran out of time in his term in office. But it's not speculative. As they said, the Times reported this summer that Comey and McCabe both were magically somehow selected for rare and highly intrusive audits by the IRS. Trump has said he knows nothing about the audits. The IRS has asked its inspector general to investigate. And I mean, why don't you just go to him and tell him I was ordered to audit these people? And then that's the end of the investigation. And officials have insisted the two men who were selected randomly for their audits. Really? Okay. Mr. Kelly has said he made clear to Mr. Trump that there were serious legal and ethical issues with what he wanted. He said that despite the president's expressed desires to have Comey and McCabe investigated by the IRS, he believes that he led Trump during his tenure as chief of staff to forego trying to have such investigations conducted. After Kelly left the administration, Comey was informed in 2019 that his 2017 returns were being audited, and McCabe learned in 2021 that his 2019 returns were being audited. At the time both audits occurred, the IRS was led by a Trump political appointee. Trump regularly made his demands in response to news reports in which he thought his perceived enemies made him look bad. The president would carry on about having them investigated to the point that Kelly thought he needed to tell the president that what he wanted was highly problematic, explaining in somewhat heated conversations that what Trump wanted was not just potentially illegal and immoral, but could also blow back on him. Well, all right. Mr. Trump would eventually let the idea go, more or less, Kelly said, but during subsequent outbursts about his enemies, he would again bring up his desires to have them investigated. Throughout Trump's presidency, he regularly, both in public and in private, ranted about Comey, whom Mr. Trump had fired in May of 2017, and McCabe, who played a leading role in the investigation into the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. Kelly said that along with Comey and McCabe, Trump discussed using the IRS and the Justice Department to investigate former CIA Director John Brennan, Hillary Clinton as well, and Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post, whose coverage often angered Mr. Trump. Peter Strzok, as well, is on the list, the lead FBI agent on the Russia investigation, and Lisa Page, an FBI official who exchanged text messages with Mr. Strzok that were critical of Mr. Trump. That's not the way he would describe their relationship, Trump, of course, but they're being discreet on their behalf, I guess, today here at the New York Times. The U.S. government, whether it's the IRS or the Justice Department, should never be weaponized or used to retaliate, and certainly not because someone criticizes you in the press or is your political opponent, Mr. Kelly said in response to questions. The average federal employee or FBI agent or IRS agent goes to work and executes the laws and regulations and shouldn't be put in that position. A spokeswoman for Trump denied the former president had ever discussed using the IRS. It's a total fiction created by a psycho, John Kelly. Okay, well, wasn't he the mad dog anyway? Who never said this before and made it up because he's become so irrelevant, said the spokeswoman, Liz Harrington. That is rather childish. Kelly, who also served as Trump's first Homeland Security Secretary, was Trump's longest-serving White House Chief of Staff, a role in which he brought a semblance of order to an often chaotic West Wing. Unlike many former top Trump administration officials, Kelly has said little publicly since Trump left office and has not written a book. But in response to repeated questions over months, Kelly said he chose to respond now because Trump had publicly claimed last week that he had used the Justice Department and the FBI to help Ron DeSantis win election in Florida in 2018. Kelly, who was Trump's chief of staff at the time, said Trump never made such a request. If he had, Kelly said, it would have been an improper use of the Justice Department and the FBI. Kelly's statements are among the most damning from a former high-ranking official about Trump's efforts to use federal power to his own ends and come just days before Trump is scheduled to announce another presidential campaign. His account of some of Trump's requests, including his efforts to use the Justice Department against his enemies and to remove security clearances for former officials, has been corroborated by other public disclosures and former Trump aides. Kelly said that after he initially started working for Trump as his chief of staff in July of 2017, he was surprised that Trump actually thought he would follow through on what the president wanted. He initially thought I would do it. Wait a second. Make sure I understand exactly what's going on. Kelly said after he initially started working for Trump, he was surprised that Trump actually thought he would follow through on what the president wanted. He initially thought I would do it, and he thought I would be loyal and obedient to him. I see. Okay. I told him we were loyal to our oath to the Constitution. Mr. Kelly said Trump had no appreciation for that concept and continued to push him and others to do what he wanted. If he told you to slit someone's throat, he thought you would go out and do it, Kelly said. Well, Kelly said he would tell Trump why using the powers of the federal government for his political ends was morally and legally problematic. I would say it's inappropriate, it's illegal, and it's against their integrity, and the IRS knows what it's doing, and it's not a good idea, Kelly said he told Mr. Trump. Yeah, but they're writing bad things about me, Mr. Kelly said Mr. Trump told him. Among other steps sought by Mr. Trump, Mr. Kelly said, was the revocation of security clearances for officials from the George W. Bush and Obama administrations who had gone on to be critical of Trump on television. Among them were Mr. Brennan, James Clapper Jr., the former director of national intelligence, Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and National Security Agency, and the retired Admiral William McRaven, the former head of Special Operations Command. I don't want them making money, Mr. Kelly said Mr. Trump told him. Mr. Kelly said that during his tenure, the officials' security clearances remained intact. In refuting the claims by Mr. Trump that he had used the Justice Department and the FBI to help DeSantis when he faced a potential recount in 2018, Kelly said no such request had been made to the Justice Department or FBI. In fact, Kelly said Trump was growing increasingly disillusioned with DeSantis at the time. That fall, Mr. DeSantis had distanced himself from Mr. Trump's public claim that Democrats inflated the death toll in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Maria. He was insufficiently impressed with DeSantis' loyalty to him, Mr. Kelly said. Trump never made any secret of his belief that he could use his government powers to his political ends, frequently saying in public that the Justice Department should investigate his enemies and that the former intelligence officials should not have clearances. Congressional and Justice Department investigations, new media accounts, and books about the Trump presidency have all shown that Trump tried behind closed doors to use the powers of the Justice Department against his enemies, but far less is known about how he tried to weaponize the IRS. Trump was familiar with how the IRS audits functioned. In the closing year of his presidency, he remained engaged in a decades-long audit battle with the agency over the legitimacy of a $72.9 million tax refund he claimed and received after declaring huge losses. The current status of the audit is not publicly known. It is against federal law for executive branch employees, including the president, the vice president, or any White House official, to request directly or indirectly that anyone at the Internal Revenue Service conduct an investigation or audit of any taxpayer. The Times reported in July that between 2019 and 2021, when the IRS was being led by Mr. Trump's appointee, Mr. Comey and Mr. McCabe were subjected to the same type of rare audit that is so invasive it is known among tax lawyers as an autopsy without the benefit of death. Boy, that sounds fun. Although it does sound like, gosh, we've had this information already. I feel like we're stringing this article out a little bit, Michael. IRS officials have insisted that the men were randomly picked for the audit, said that already, and that there were no political motivations behind how they were chosen. Of the 153 million returns filed for the year Mr. Comey was audited, only 5,000 out of the 153 million returns were targeted for the audit. And for the year McCabe was audited, 154 million people filed returns and 8,000 were selected for audit. Kelly said that Trump was particularly obsessed with McCabe's wife, Jill, who had run for Virginia's state assembly around the time the FBI was investigating Mrs. Clinton's use of a personal email account. Mr. Trump has repeatedly made the false claim that Mrs. McCabe, a Democrat, received money for her campaign directly from the Clintons. That was proof McCabe hated him, Mr. Kelly said. Trump regularly attacked Comey and McCabe in public while he was president. He called Comey a dirty cop who should be tried for treason and, quote, should be arrested on the spot. He also accused Mr. McCabe of treason. By the end of the Trump administration, the Justice Department and its Inspector General had investigated the conduct of Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, and a range of matters, but they were never charged with any crimes. A year before McCabe's audit began, Trump raised public doubts about McCabe's finances. Was Andy McCabe ever forced to pay back the $700,000 illegally given to him and his wife for his wife's political campaign by crooked Hillary Clinton? While Hillary was under FBI investigation and McCabe was the head of the FBI? Just asking, Mr. Trump tweeted in September 2020. And interestingly, that he closes the article here without addressing the issue of what? $700,000 illegally given to him by Hillary Clinton. What's at the root of that accusation, and what do we have to say about that? But we're out of time. But we did tell you twice that they were subjected to very, very rare audits. But at least we reiterated that point for you so you could not forget it. All right, I think he could have taken another direction with the word count that he was given. Okay, well, time now to wrap things up before handing it over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, next right here on Netroots Radio. But we're not quite at musical outro yet, but we're probably, I don't know, I feel like we're a little too close to the end of the show to start anything brand new. But maybe we'll read this opinion piece. There's always room for Jamel Bowie. We'll say that. Something that he wrote, was it on Election Day, November 8th, just heading into things, just reminding everybody, no one forced Republicans to do any of these things, the things that they were punished for at the voting booth last week. In the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. What? Karl Marx famously observed, men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. Our choices are shaped and even bound by the histories and institutions we inhabit, and yet they're still our choices. We are moral agents responsible for our decisions, even if we can't fully escape the matrix in which we make them. And yet, so much of the conversation about modern Republican parties assumes the opposite. The Republican politicians are impossibly bound to the needs and desires of their coalition and unable to resist its demands. Many, too many, one might say, too many, yes, Political observers speak as if Republican leaders and officials had no choice but to accept Donald Trump into the fold, no choice but to apologize for his every transgression, no choice but to humor his attempt to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election, and now no choice but to embrace election-denying candidates around the country. But that's nonsense, as you've already figured out, and Jamel joins you in saying so. For all the pressures of the base, for all the fear of Trump and his gift for ridicule, for all the demands of the donor class, it is also true that at every turn, Republicans in Washington and everywhere else have made an active and affirmative choice to embrace the worst elements of their party and jettison the norms and values that make democracy work for the sake of their narrow political and ideological objectives. That's true. By the way, their objectives, for what it's worth, are nothing new. To the extent that the Trump-era Republican Party has an agenda, it is what it's always been, to be a handmaiden to the total domination of capital, to facilitate the upward redistribution of wealth, and to strengthen hierarchies of class and status. To those ends, Republicans in Washington have already announced plans to reduce social insurance, cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans, and restrict abortion rights. You knew all that was true. I recommend that you read the exciting conclusion, of course, and we'll provide you with a link to do that. And now, hand you off to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next.
NetworksRadio.com.
You don't even have to change the channel, and there's really no channel
You've been
anymore.
listening to Kagro.
Just keep it here.
With David Waldman.
And what'll happen if you do? Well, you'll hear his stories about how Democrats defied midterm inspections, not only in the national races, but also by making historic gains in state legislatures. And on the rest of the menu, Republican-engineered shorter voting window could cut turnout in the Georgia runoff. Be aware of that and do what you can to help prevent it. See you next time.